call the open session of the June 8th, 2022 regular meeting to order. We will go ahead and start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Before we do roll call, I'd like to take a moment this evening as a moment of silence. We lost a community member today, and I apologize, I'm a little shaken up about it. My neighbor, Brianna Scott, passed away this afternoon in the hospital, and if we could all observe a moment of silence, I'd appreciate it. Thank you. Could I get a roll call, please?
Councilmember Levin?
Here.
Councilmember Ackerman?
Present.
Councilmember Fatula?
Present.
Mayor Burris?
Present.
And Mayor Pro Tem Mendoza is not here.
We will move to approval of the agenda order, item 2E.
So moved. Second.
In favor?
Aye. Aye. Aye.
Aye. No opposition, no abstention. Item passes. We will move to the consent calendar. Item 3, all items on the consent calendar will be moved upon one blanket motion with one council vote unless an item is to be pulled by a member of the public or a member of the council. If you do wish to pull an item, please come to the podium and speak clearly into the microphone. You do need to be very close to the microphone in order for us to pick up your voice properly. Do we have anybody who'd like to pull any items from the consent calendar this evening?
I got a couple items just that I think we need to talk about to emphasize because they're good news. So I'd like to pull them just so we can talk about them and put them separate. So 3B, 3G, and 3H.
Okay, 3B, 3G, and 3H. Do I have any other items anyone would like to pull? All right, seeing none, can I get a motion to approve the consent calendar with the exception of items 3B, 3G, and 3H?
So moved.
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
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 All right, no opposition, no abstention, passes. Let's move to item 3B.
Okay, Les, can you take just a minute and describe what 3B is so that most people have just a general awareness of what that item is?
I think it'd be a little more appropriate if Mick covered 3B. It's the local agency biannual notice.
Yeah, this comes up every year. You are required every other year, the city is required every other year to take a look at conflict of interest code and make any updates as necessary. There's no real updates as necessary this time except for the change of one position title. So when you change position titles, the FTPC wants to know that. The city conflict of interest code, that's all this does. Other than that, the conflict of interest code will continue as it is.
Yeah. And then I had one question somebody asked me as I was walking my dogs around the streets, well, my one dog around the street. There's a section, I think it's on page 12, that has multiple categories.
Those are disclosure categories.
Yeah. And the question was, it looks like everybody is category 1. Do we have any categories 2 through 5?
We don't. There's kind of a long explanation for this. Like the old conflict of interest code had dozens of categories, dozens of disclosure categories. Several years ago, it was revised, so we just created, I think, 4 or 5. Yeah. The council's policy was, though, that everybody who has a potential conflict of interest, either because of employment or ownership of property or whatever, should be as transparent as possible and disclose as much as possible. So that's the policy of the city. Everybody who has a potential conflict has to make the broadest possible disclosures.
Yeah, so pretty much we only have category 1.
We only use category 1. We may create a position that will require one of the other categories to be used, but right now everybody is category 1 because that's the broadest disclosure.
Okay, thank you. So,
All right. Do we have any public comment on item 3B? All right, seeing none, I'll bring it back to the board.
motion to approve 3B?
Can I get a second?
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, no abstentions, no opposed. Item passes. Moving to item 3G. sewer lift station and wastewater treatment plant backup diesel power generator recommendation.
So, Wes, could you just speak to that one just briefly? Because it looks like that one's got a positive story budget-wise.
It does. So just a little background on this project. What it was is that the staff had applied for a grant to replace all the backup power generation to the sewer collection systems and the wastewater treatment plant. The city was effective in receiving a $300,000 grant. Since then, we've installed the generators, and this is the notice of completion on the project. What this does is that acknowledge that the project's done, and it puts a 1-year warranty on the bonds for the contractor moving forward. So 1 year from now, if there's nothing wrong, then we release the bond and then the project moves forward as complete.
Okay, and how much were we under budget on?
Let me look at that.
I
Sorry.
think it's $38,000.
Yeah, it was $38,000. We're under budget on the project. It turned out really nice. Yeah.
So I just wanted to say for everybody, thank you for keeping an eye on this and helping drive this so it's under budget.
Thank you, Joe.
Okay.
All right, now that we have completed that portion, do you have any other questions at the end of that?
Nope.
Okay, great. All right, do we have any public comment? All right, seeing none, I will bring it back to the board.
Motion approved?
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. All right, no abstentions, no opposed, item passes. Moving to item 3H, wastewater treatment plant laboratory services, 49er water services.
Okay, and same kind of question on this one here.
So this one's more about routine water sampling that we're required to do out at the wastewater treatment plant to comply with our MPDS permit. We've been working with 49er Labs for the past few years, and what had happened is that we were at the end of the term of their agreement, and it was important to kind of extend that agreement. Staff is recommending using the same lab for consistency, because if you introduce different labs in this process and if their quality control is not correct, we could actually receive violations on the back end, and then proving whether it's a lab mistake or a process mistake can be very challenging. So this is why staff is recommending that we approve this agreement tonight for a 3-year contract with the ability to extend it for year 4 and 5 on it.
Okay, thank you. That's it. Yeah.
Any public comment on item 3H? All right, seeing none, bringing it back to the board.
Motion approved?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, no abstentions, no opposed, item passes. Moving to item 4, agency reports. We will start with Placer County Sheriff's Department.
City Council, Sergeant Kevin Burgess from Placer County Sheriff's Office. Where you'll see all our sergeants training and all of our battalion chiefs training here in the local area. I know that school shootings have been in the news, quite popular right now with what happened in Uvalde, Texas. I can tell you this, that the sheriff's office and your deputies have been training for that for the last 15 years that I've been around. You will not have a single deputy who will wait for anybody else to arrive. Your Colfax deputy, if he's here and something starts happening at one of your schools, he's not waiting for a unit from Auburn, a unit from Forest Hill or Loomis or wherever else. He's going to the school and he's going to work. He's going to go right into that school and he's not going to stop until he can finish that or until more people are there. And we all go to work. It doesn't matter who shows up. So it'll be a much different outcome for our area here in Colfax and Placer County as a whole. So I just want to make sure everybody is aware of that. We take that training extremely serious and we really care about everybody's kids because we've all got them. So it's going to be a much different outcome here. When you talk about our incidents here in Colfax over the last month, we've had 143 calls for service. But I got to tell you, I was out yesterday right here at our own job fair that the mayor put on, and I was standing next to Deputy Barker. And as I was standing there for about 20 minutes, and I think Trinity was aware of it, he received 3 different phone calls from community members that he had to talk to and help them through some situations that are calls for service, or should be calls for service, that he handles every day, that his phone is open for that. And I've talked to him about that because I'm like, Barker, you've got to have a weekend. Because if it's happening on his regular days, it's happening on his weekends. And to him, it's really not that big of a deal. But I'm going to ask again that the public, our own council members, everybody within the city, if you have a need for law enforcement, please call dispatch. Call dispatch, talk to dispatch. We have 4 great deputies working in this city right now that will help you out the same as Deputy Barker would. Deputy Barker deserves his time off. He deserves his time. He's got kids. He's got people that he wants to play with. And for 3 calls in 20 minutes for us, I'm sure that's happening all weekend. So I'm going to again ask if you have a call for service. Plus, that gets all that information from dispatch into deputies' hands. It gets a much faster response if it's a need for more than 1 deputy. And it'll be taken care of that way. In fact, we're talking about our 4 deputies, right? We know we have Deputy Barker on the front end, Sunday through Wednesday day shift. We have Deputy Tanaromi, who's behind me on swing shift on the front end, Sunday through Wednesday. We have Deputy Jacobs, who's been around Wednesday through Saturday on the day shift. And then we've got our new deputy, James Alberg, who's going to come up here and introduce himself in just a second, that's working swing shift Wednesday through Saturday. James, we put out this opening back in October, November, I think we interviewed for it. And we did the interview with deputies trying to figure out who was the right fit for Colfax. James came to us, asked if he could test, knowing that he still had a commitment to the jail till May of 2022. He was the best. He's a local guy, lives up here, cares about this community. And we felt, you know what, we're going to wait. We're not going to just fill the spot with a deputy who just, for whatever reason, wants to come up here. We want the best fit for that. So we used a relief deputy for this last rotation, and James Alberg came and joined us on May. So I'm going to let him come up here and tell a little bit about his history. And
thank you, Sergeant. James Alberg. I've been a deputy here for Placer County about 3 years. I've been in law enforcement as a peace officer about 9 years now. I live in Chicago Park, so I shop and dine here frequently in Colfax. I don't have any kids, just a wife. She's a school teacher, not locally, but up in Grass Valley. So if you see me on the streets, feel free to say hi. I'm very glad to be here and definitely feel like I'm part of the community. So thank you.
Well, thank you. We're very thankful to have you. And we're very thankful to the Sheriff's Department for being so considerate with your selection process. It means a lot.
yeah, it means a lot to me as a supervisor, right? I also want the right person up here. If I have the right people, everything gets handled correctly.
Mhm.
And then that's a lot less stress on me. And they do a fantastic job for this community because they're a part of this community. Every single person is from the hills, right? We don't have anybody coming up from Roseville to come and work their shift and then go home at the end of the day. They all shop, work, eat right here in Colfax. So that's appreciated. Is there any other questions for me?
Anything, Council? Thank you.
No, thank you.
All right, we do have CHP here this evening.
Yes, baseball season's over. Sort of. Started travel ball now.
Hi, Chris, Dave, California Highway Patrol, Golden area. Just to piggyback off a couple things you said on the active shooter training stuff. We were actually training as a department again right now. We're starting up we do it annually. We're doing it again. So we will be training again with the sheriff like always. But we also changed our protocol with active shooter stuff. It used to be arrive, wait for backup, then proceed. Now it's just go. It's just go. So kind of the same as their format. And then the calls for service, again, just piggyback on what he said too, is I get a lot of the same thing. A lot of people call me on my cell phone, which I'm happy to help people with their issues, concerns. I think a lot of it stems from the fact that people don't feel that their issues or concerns are worthy of a 911 call. They are, trust me. I mean, when I'm in my backyard, digging a hole in my shorts and flip flops, I can't help. And so I always hang up the phone and tell them call 911. I'll be happy to come help, but 911 is going to get people there faster. So just to piggyback off of that. So some stats I'm going to run by real quick. So highway shootings. Our highway shootings have doubled in the last 3 years, jumping from 210 in 2019 to nearly 500 in the last 11 months. Hundreds of people have been injured and 50 have died. What's behind the numbers, we don't know. A lot of people are coinciding it with the coronavirus pandemic. I don't know. I don't know if that's it or not. We do have a slump in gang-related highway shootings. That is down. But the road rage highway violence shootings are way up. From 2020 to 2021, the first, so the gang violence shooting went down 38%, while the road rage went up 54%. So as you can see, in the last couple of years, the driving patterns are drastically changing. People are getting much more aggressive. It's not even the fact that people are driving fast, people are driving aggressive. The unsafe lane changes, the tailgating, the in and out, our speeds are climbing. If you're going 80 miles an hour on the freeway these days, you're getting blown by people. Excuse me. So even with the trucks, we're having an issue now with the trucks. I mean, the speeds of the big the truck tractors or big rigs, however you want to say it, their speeds are climbing 70, 75, 80. Our numbers are down, so we're doing the best we can to be proactive to decrease that. And then just one more stat here for our Memorial Day weekend. We had our maximum enforcement period for the state, which means we try to get as many law enforcement officers on the road as we can. We had 891 DUI arrests and 15 deaths reported from fatal collisions, which the majority of those were people not wearing seatbelts. So throw the seatbelts on. Our DUI numbers are up, fatalities are up, DUIs are up. As I said, the aggressive driving's up. So we're doing what we can to try to alleviate that, but our numbers are way down. So we do have, this weekend, we have 128 cadets graduating from the academy, which this is not even going to scratch the surface of what we need as a department. But it's a help. It helps. I had one more thing and I just forgot it. Oh, Crystal Springs Overcrossing, just a heads up. Crystal Springs Overcrossing is closed tonight. So if anybody heading that direction, if you want to take Crystal Springs exit, you either have to take Alta and take the back road or go up the Drum Vorbe, turn around and come back, because the Baxter Overcrossing isn't there. It's gone. So they're redoing that. So just for anybody heading that direction, just a heads up, Crystal Springs will be closed from 8 p.m. tonight till 8 a.m. tomorrow morning. So any questions?
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Do you know when they're going to put the cameras back on? Because couple of those intersections used to have cameras. And I know in
The Caltrans cameras?
Yeah, the Caltrans.
Yeah, that's a good question. I have no idea. Yeah.
Okay, because we direct a lot of people to come by our shop as soon as the snow's hit. Go look at the cameras. You can see if there's traffic moving or not.
So what cameras are you referring to?
The ones you get on the.
You mean like all the ones on 80?
Yep, the ones on 80, specifically 80.
Okay.
Yeah, and right now I think the only ones you have is Colfax. And the next one up the road.
Yeah, there's a bunch of down. I know that a bunch of them got knocked down when the bridges got replaced or being replaced. So when they go back up, I don't know. Hey, real quick, I forgot to just go back to the highway violence shootings. Interstate 80 is the number one for gun violence. And then 580 corridor is number 2. So just be careful when you get involved in this. If you got somebody that's angry, aggressive, don't do anything to provoke them. Avoid eye contact, avoid the hand gestures, the turning your windshield wiper fluid on to get their windshield wet stuff. Because that just provokes people. And everyone's carrying these days, so you just never know what you're dealing with. And everybody's kind of wackadoodle. So just a heads up. So 80 is the number 1. So
On that note, circling back to the active shooter training, as I have mentioned previously, if you need someone to be a volunteer for that training who is okay with being shot with ammunition, I am here and I am more than willing to do it. I've done it before and I would happily participate again.
we just had a group one with Cal Fire, SO, us, about 2 years ago. It was Ty, so Ty was up here, so we're probably about due to do another one, so we'll get that work in the works, so. All right, we'll keep that in mind. Thank you.
Well, keep them all in mind. Put it in your cell phone and call me.
I can make that happen, but we need somebody to get it.
Do it for the. Okay. All right. We'll go ahead and move on. Placer County Fire Department, CAL FIRE.
All right, Madam Mayor, City Council, City Manager, Jeff Lovelace, Battalion Chief, CAL FIRE, Placer County Fire Department. Kind of how I always start, a little bit of where we're at on the weather and the fire outlook. We did get a little bit of rain. I think it was about 1.5, somewhere around here, on inches in this kind of vicinity, a little bit higher up the road a bit. But to be honest, that dried out fairly quickly. We already had 2 fires today, about 5 acres. So even though we did get that, we're already kind of back at the fire potential or heavy fire potential. Last week we were kind of on our fuels. We were at the max of kind of historic max of where the dry fuels are, and I would assume probably by next week we'll probably be right back to where we started. With that being said, for CAL FIRE, we did go to peak staffing with all of our engines, including staffing of the lookout Mount Howell. So we will have somebody in there from usually about 10 to 5, 10 to 6. Depending on that staffing, that is kind of a volunteer VIP basis. For some of the statistics, if you go ahead and take a look, and this is for May, kind of added this chart in there. You can see the blue is going to be for Station 30, and then the gray is Station 36. These are some of the calls that are ran. You can kind of see the jurisdiction of that with the 73 calls for Company 36 and then 108 for the Station 30. So most of those are medical, but you do have some fires in there. I can imagine over the next month or two, the column on the left is probably going to grow a little bit, excuse me, including some of the vehicle fire. But as of right now, that's what we're looking at. In the past, this month, we had 11 vegetation fires for only 3 acres or just under 3 acres. But like I said, just today, we're already past that. So some of the equipment we ended up purchasing for Company 36. Again, we're upgrading some of that equipment that has been old or not working well. With that, we have ordered some hose, covers, and a few things like that to make it operational and more ready, including some of the normal standard tools to outfit that. Some of the training, as Sergeant Griffith said, some of the command and control, and then we do have that on the 22nd, I believe, and then including that with some of the training, did it up at Station 33, but included the Company 36 and all the Placer County Fire Department volunteers for extrication. Obviously, we have I-80 is a pretty good corridor for some of those major vehicle accidents. So getting some of that training done with 4 vehicles that we were able to tear up and go through. The job fair, I'm sure you'll mention that. I thought it was a pretty good success. We did have, if you go to the next slide, we did have our newest recruit. He's a 4-year-old that we were able to hopefully hire in the next few years. But ultimately, I think it was a good, pleasant experience. The UP Railroad, kind of a quick update on that. Chief Rufinot and Martin has been working. They did get in contact, and there is a plan that is in place for it. The more specifics you'll have to, and we can bring them up for more details if you'd like. For the Brush 37, and that was kind of the topic in the last one. So we do have a plan in place. This is a tentative plan, I will tell you that, to bring a Type 3 engine down. So right now we have a Type 1 engine that is more structure capability, has more flow to the water, and then we have a rescue, which in most cases it fulfills all the needs that we need for this community. The Type 3, as we call it, the engine is the Brush that ended up going out of service because it was not DOT compliant. We couldn't drive it not only because of that, CHP is still in the room, but also because the safety of our folks. And it's just that liability and the worth is not there. So we do have a plan to bring a Type 3 down. Again, this is tentative. We do want to restripe some things to make it actually in service and appropriate for this community. I will say there is, for Placer County Fire Department itself, there's 32 pieces of equipment that does not include any utilities or any of those pickups, but actual engines, rescues, those kind of pieces of equipment that at any point any of our volunteers are able to jump on. They have the ability with notification to respond to calls on any one of those. So we do have that moving part. And I will say there is a bigger picture on operationally moving some of the equipment that would be better suited for different areas. And all that's kind of coming into play with the restriping and making things in service. So hopefully that was able to answer some of those questions that you guys had for the last meeting.
So when you said you had a tentative plan for that vehicle.
Correct.
What's the date on the tentative?
I don't have a date for you right now. And as it continues going through, I will tell you, we have a big meeting tomorrow that we can kind of work some of these things out, because it doesn't just include this particular area. It includes all of Placer County, that we're able to move some things and kind of do, I don't want to say horse trading, but able to move the appropriate resources operationally that would be better suited for certain areas.
Okay, well, but you know, when you say you have a tentative plan,
Right.
Correct.
you can't have a plan without a date. Otherwise, you have no plan. So I don't know what you mean when you say a tentative plan. You either have a tentative plan or you don't have a tentative.
We have a plan, but do not have a date for it. So we have to
You mean you have a concept?
We have a concept. We have
You have
a.
it written on paper as a plan?
You have,
I feel like we're belaboring a point in a way that's maybe not appropriate for the order. I understand what Joe is saying though, and I feel like it's critical that we do have the fundamental information set in stone. Is there any way that we can get a written update after tomorrow's meeting that includes some more solidified information?
yes, and I can tell you the tentative plan, but the authority and authorization isn't there yet.
We have a plan in place right now to move some equipment around. I'm not going to say which equipment's moving where, because we're trying to, it's going to obviously take equipment from one area and put it into another area. Okay, I still want to, the primary reason to get rid of that brush, it was not DOT compliant. And if it ends up on its top, where's the liability fall on that? Falls on Placer County Fire Department, right? It's not, it wasn't just that. We have had some other equipment in the county system in the last couple of years that we phased out, got rid of it, and put newer equipment into there. So getting the equipment in Placer County all involved into a equipment replacement plan is super important.
Mm-hmm.
One of the pieces of equipment that I want to put in there right now, I'm looking at sending that piece of equipment to a fire department, a fire truck manufacturer, basically, and spending several $1,000s on it for some restriping. I don't want to take that out because it's an out of service piece of equipment and put something in that a year from now is going to be an out of service equipment piece of equipment. I want to put something in there that is going to stay in there for several years, and it's going to be a functional piece of equipment. It's not going to be constantly going to the shop. Fire engines, water tenders, they have a wear out period. They get used, and not having a replacement plan is an issue. So trying to make sure that we have a solid system that's going to work, but it's going to take time. Mm-hmm. Right now, if we order a Type 3 engine, we're looking at about 2 years to get that. From the time we pay the company the money, it's looking about 2 years. That's a huge issue. And that's due to COVID and supply issues. And it's across the board. Equipment is skyrocketed in price. A new ladder truck right now is $1.5 million. A Type 1 engine is about $750,000. So it's just completely skyrocketed. So we're trying to work around some of that, make our equipment good, functional, and safe for our people, and good for the community too, because that's what it boils down to.
We appreciate it. And I'm just going to be very blunt and to the point. I think one of the big concerns of our community members, like we discussed yesterday, was when we made this transition with Placer Fire Department, it was fundamental to the community to know that our volunteers still had the capability to respond in a meaningful manner. And I think that it's going to be critical for us to have something in writing with a plan of action to make sure that there is adequate equipment for them to respond should there be another river fire incident or something of, extenuating circumstance requiring our volunteers to respond. And so I understand that you guys have further negotiations, that those need to happen tomorrow. But if we can get a written update following those negotiations, I think it would be very much appreciated by the board.
Yeah, the equipment we have, that's, totally understand. The equipment that we have right now between the rescue and the Type 1 engine does everything or more than that brush engine did. So there's no real, that brush engine, typically we use those down the valley areas where we can do a pump and roll operation or do a hose lay. We can do a hose lay with that Type 1 engine. So we're not, as long as we have the volunteers, that's the biggest thing, volunteers to get on the equipment, we're good to go.
And I understand there has been an increase in response rate from the volunteers, is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so even with that increased response rate, you guys feel confident in the equipment plan that, again, is tentative as of this moment, but we're going to have to get that further information tomorrow. In substantiating that update and the equipment, can you guys provide us, and I know I'm asking for more information at this point, but can you provide us essentially the scenarios and how this is going to work to where our volunteers have the equipment they need? That way it's easier to comprehend for the public and then for those of us who don't hop on a fire engine and do that work ourselves.
So, and right now the equipment is in the fire stations that's capable of fighting any fire within the city. We're still covered and with the Station 30 equipment across the street. So we didn't pull a piece of equipment out and go, like a ladder truck that was here, pull it out and say, well, you don't have a ladder truck anymore. Now we don't have this size ladder. We still have those capabilities to fight fire and take care of those emergencies within the city.
And you mentioned the volunteers have several pieces of equipment that are not stationed here. They're allowed to hop on for emergencies here. Could you elaborate on that?
If they're trained, so Station 182 has a water tender 182 and breathing support 182. And in the Placer County Fire System, or even the Alta Station 98, there's 2 water tenders up there and an engine up there. If the volunteers are checked off on that piece of equipment, it doesn't matter if they're volunteers out of the Colfax area, they can respond on that as long as they're checked off on it, vice versa. Dry Creek, the Lincoln companies, if we have volunteers that, let's say we have a volunteer that lives down there, but he works up here and his work allows him to work as leave work to be a volunteer. All he has to do is get checked off on driving it and operating it, and he's good to go. Okay. So that's the advantage of having. So how many volunteers do we have in Colfax right now? 2 volunteers.
So 2 are ours that are currently working for Cal Fire. So once they're laid off in the wintertime, you'll have.
So 4. Let's say there's 4.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay.
4 total volunteers out of Colfax, right? And we have 2 at Alta, and we have roughly, I couldn't give you the exact count because that's the West Division, but I want to say it's in the 20s to low 30s for volunteers. So that increases your volunteer pool. So those volunteers from down there could come up there and take this piece of equipment. They have to be checked off on it. It's no different than, anything else. You got to be checked off to use that equipment, liability wise.
That Type 3 engine, how many responders does it require?
2 at a minimum.
Okay. How many maximum?
Maximum, that one there will take 4. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
I won't belabor it any longer, but again, I think the board would appreciate the update tomorrow, and then I'll turn it over to the council for questions, comments, if you guys want to.
Yeah, so my reason for mentioning what I did is not to give you a hard time, but if you have a concept of what you want to do, that's one level. If you have a tentative plans have schedules and dates in it, they're not booked, right? So I can understand that. And then at some point in time, you'll have a booked plan, right? And I just want to be careful because I've seen so many people talk about they have a plan for something and it's not even written on paper. So I don't know what you mean when you say you have a tentative plan with no date. That's why I picked on that item. So I want to just very clear, if it's a concept, it's a concept. Okay, everybody starts everything with a concept. If it's a tentative plan, you got some dates in there, they're not booked yet, they're not all signed up, you still got work to do, right? And then at some point you have a committed plan. Right?
I would like to take this engine, this idea we have, I would like to put it in there tomorrow. Yeah, but that's not reality. I don't want to put an engine in there. I want to send this off and get it marked right, add some new equipment to it, maybe change the light bars on it, some different stuff, make it more functional piece of equipment, modernize the piece of equipment.
Yeah.
So,
okay, do you understand my comment?
I do.
Okay. All right, and then the question on the UP thing? You're going to give us some more details on that, you said?
I've been working with Martin on, we took a spin. We've had a bunch of complaints, not just you, some other people complaining, trying to get through that. I sent UP my contact down in LA, email, texted him and called him. I've heard nothing back. I was ready to go to a next level, and I'll let Martin take over because he has a better idea.
So yeah, essentially, kind of joined up with Mike, and we're having a difficult time making contact with UP. Wes was kind enough to provide us with the contact, Mr. Francisco Cabrillo, and we reached out to him. He's working on the back end right now. Hopefully, we should get some forward momentum. What the overall concept is at this point is we would like to establish like an annual or biannual vegetation management plan, whether that's going through mechanically removing some of the invasive species coming through, doing chemical treatment, or whatever the case might be. We need to get it in writing. We need to get a plan and it needs to be acted upon. So that way they're accountable, because it is a very real thing. So, okay.
When's our next update?
I'd love to be able to give you one tomorrow, but I would give you an update in the next council meeting.
Right.
Okay.
Any more questions?
Any more?
How many volunteers have been trained to drive any of the other equipment that's either 20 minutes away and out there, or 45 minutes away and over?
They've been given that opportunity to do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
No.
I don't know if they've been checked off.
I mean, it's a volunteer position. So I know down in the Valley area, we have a couple volunteers that are cross-trained through several stations. But as far as I don't know about up here, and people are busy. I mean,
yeah, I definitely understand the requirements of a volunteer for sure as a firefighter.
Yeah. And it boils down to safety issues and OSHA. So
I think we appreciate it. And Sean, that's a really good point. And so when you guys give that update, and I know I'm just piling on here, but when you give that update tomorrow, if you could give us some concept of the equipment that our folks we do have are capable and trained and able to operate that's available to them. I feel like that context is extremely important. And I would appreciate that being part of the report.
Yeah, our two volunteers for the equipment that we have here in this town are well trained to operate both pieces of equipment. But that's the second piece of equipment we're down. We started this contract with 4 pieces of equipment, and we're down to 2. Only one of them capable of putting water on fire. So,
well, it sounds like we had one that was living dead. So it was down without being down.
Correct.
And that's concerning to me. So I'm hopeful to see this new piece of equipment come in a timely fashion, and I look forward to the update. Thank you.
absolutely. Thanks.
Do we have any nonprofits here this evening who'd like to make a report? Colfax Garden Club, maybe? More than welcome.
Okay, well, I checked into who may have designated it. I talked to the Abbotts, and they produce Railroad Days, and they didn't designate the smoking area. At the Lions meeting, we discussed it. None of the Lions designated the area. I talked to Andrea from the Green Machine, and they didn't designate the area. So somebody put that canopy up and put those 2 ash pots there and made it a smoking area. And I assume the city must have done it because.
Madam Mayor, as part of the ordinance and stuff, is that there's the opportunity for businesses to request designated smoking areas, and we effectively went through that process with the railhead. And the request was made for that general area as a test location to try it out and see whether it works or not. It sounds like we have some challenges with it, so I think maybe we need to revisit it at this point.
Well, if there's no smoking on Main Street, how can we designate a smoking place on Main Street?
So the way that we wrote the ordinance, we tried to do it in a way that was not exclusionary to people who do smoke, but that gave us the ability to make sure the sidewalks were, again, friendly for families and events. And so we did leave a section in the ordinance that would allow businesses, especially, ones that can determine that they will have smokers as part of their client base, to be able to have an area to send them so that we don't deal with people who are flat out ignoring the ordinance and littering and so on and so forth. As Wes said, it sounds like this location in question, which I think it's very logical why this location is not a good location. It sounds like it went through the process, it was tried, and there is error. So I think that we're very much on the same page as the Garden Club and the Lions Club that we'd like to reevaluate and pick a different location that's not going to cause problems for families and for other customers.
Right.
I don't think it's fair to the general public to, have that imposed on you, obviously.
And we discussed another place. We should figure out another place. And the Lions couldn't come up with anything because the Todds don't want people behind their building. The US Bank, we'd have to deal with insurance issues and that wouldn't work out. But what about, there's no one driving in to charge their cars. And the city does own that little lot. And in the back up against the railroad fence, why can't we put the smoking thing there? That way it doesn't affect anybody.
We'll look into it, but my immediate concern is that is an area where vehicles are expected to have movement in there. So we don't want to designate a smoking area to where it's not where pedestrians are expected to be.
I'm just talking about during events, not any other time,
Right.
Only during the events.
That sounds reasonable, Jan.
Okay?
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. And then did we have any other nonprofits? I don't see any. All right. We will move on to item 5. We have a presentation this evening presented by Mike Lucan, Executive Director of Placer County Transportation Planning Agency.
Good evening, everybody. Madam Mayor and members of the council, thanks for having me here tonight. It's good to be back here in a non-virtual environment. So tonight, I just wanted to come and provide you an update of our South Placer County transportation sales tax measure, where we're at in that, because it does have an indirect effect on Colfax, and so update you on that. But also, give an opportunity for, as you did with your other participants tonight, with fire and CHP and police, to ask me any questions that you have about transportation, and I'll also address some issues that we're facing. If we could go to the next slide. So, as with everything, transportation is becoming, and transportation infrastructure is becoming very difficult in the state of California and throughout the nation, and especially in South Placer. That is where most of the growth is occurring in Placer County. As we grow at a tremendous rate, we're still one of the fastest growing areas in the entire nation, the entire county, but especially in the south part of the county. We don't, although a lot of our focus is on roads, we really need all forms of transportation. We need roads, we need transit, we need bike and ped, we need the whole gamut. And in the past, we had, I wouldn't say it was easy, but it was, we didn't have as many challenges as we have now. And we have a big challenge that has come up in the past year. And that's that little document on the right-hand side of the screen, which is the state's Climate Action Plan for Transportation Infrastructure, or CAPDI. I'll use that acronym in my presentation. So CAPDI basically says that it discourages, I'll say that, expansion of roadways for that increase vehicle miles traveled. So roughly most expansion of roadways. But it puts a precedent on transit and bicycle and pedestrian projects. Well, that's a significant challenge for Placer County, because we have we're still in growth mode, where a lot of the rest of the state has grown to their grown out and done a lot of expansion projects, but we're at the point where we still need quite a bit of expansion. And how that affects places like Colfax, and related to your prior speakers, is that also affects things when we want to increase the roadways for for emergency evacuation. So now we have to, where it was a fairly easy and straightforward discussion about expansion of roadways for evacuation, the onus is now upon us to prove that it's not going to be used for traffic, basically. It's only going to be used for evacuation. That's a very, very high hurdle to make. And so as we expand roadways here in Colfax, limited in nature, but throughout the rest of the county, it's very difficult. And even, you think, well, that just affects maybe, areas up the hill here, but, if we had a mass evacuation, take, for example, the 8065 interchange. It is not designed for contraflow or anything like that. And so we need to upgrade that interchange if we have to have a mass evacuation. And so it's really important for us to be able to do things not just for traffic, but for other purposes like emergency services. The state has, decided there's not going to be any phase out of this policy. It's immediate. It's immediate executive order, and we are implementing CAPTI immediately. And so Caltrans and CTC and other state agencies are immediately implementing CAPTI and immediately restricting projects that are expansion. And we are finding ways around that. I'm not finding ways around it. We're finding ways to comply with CAPTI and still expand our roadways. But my last point there, kind of at what cost? I'll give you an example with the 8065 interchange. We're probably looking at adding a very large light and heavy duty truck charging facility to that. That's a $30, $40, $50 million addition to that project, and just makes that project way more expensive than the $500 million it already is. So we have a lot of challenges as we move forward with transportation around the county. Next slide. I probably got these out of order, but kind of who we are. We are the county's transportation planning agency. We were created about 35 years ago now. And the reason we exist, we're a special district. We're not the county. We're not although county's in our name. Next slide. We are a special district, and we're made up of all the members, all the city councils and town councils and the board of supervisors. And Trinity the mayor is our prime member on our board. And the reason we exist, and this is very important, is way back then we decided, we don't want people in West Sacramento or Davis telling us where we spend our money and what our priorities are. We want to do it ourselves. We want to make sure that our projects come in on time and on budget. And it's worked very well. And we have had every single one of our projects come in on time and on budget. And we're very good stewards of the taxpayer dollars. But this is the model that we live in. And I know you as the council know this, but for others, they kind of scratch their head and go, who's this PCTPA with this long name and why do they exist? But that's why we exist, because we are good shepherds of taxpayer dollars, and we make sure we get the job done with our partners. Next slide. So what's the problem and this is talking about South Placer County, but it's not just South Placer County. So we have all these projects. We have $3 billion in projects that we have to, and more for the entire county, that we have to implement over the next 30 or 40 years. And in Placer County, most of the growth happens again in the south part of the county, but most of the growth pays for a big chunk of that. So $2 billion of that $3 billion is paid for every time you build a house, every time you build a commercial space, every time you build an office. You pay a impact fee to the cities and to PCTPA for regional infrastructure to pay for things. Well, the problem is we have a gap, and that's because of what we have already. So we can't make developers pay for existing problems. And we also, in Placer County, we can't pay for people that are driving through Placer County. We can't make the developer pay for somebody that's traveling from San Francisco to Lake Tahoe. So we have this gap. Next slide. And this is kind of the key. And everybody says, well, how the heck did we get here? This used to work just fine. And that's because up until about 15 years ago, and dating all the way back to the Eisenhower administration, the state and the federal government used to fund 90% of the cost of especially regional projects. And we had to come up with 10%. That 10% was very easy to get, not very easy, but easier to get through those impact fees. But about 15 years ago, the funding formula didn't change, but the way you compete for these funds changed. And so in order to get this state and federal funding now to be competitive, it's not good enough to submit, 11.87% or 20% in some examples. You have to come up with half of the money. So if you're building a bike ped project, you have to come up with half. So like the Bunch Creek Trail, which I know is very near and dear to the city of Colfax, to compete for ATP funds for that, you'll have to come up with half, not just the 10% anymore. And that's a very, very difficult hurdle. Next slide. So everybody, and their next question is, well, wait a minute, we just passed this thing called the gas tax, and why isn't it paying for everything? Well, the good news is it pays for what we have already. The state, in its infinite wisdom, kind of decided, it took 17 years to get the gas tax, and over arguments and literally tens of billions of dollars in backlog and projects, they basically kind of said, well, the farthest we can get is a gas tax that would pay for what we have already. So the kind of the fix it first mentality, which is, we need that. So because we have a lot of things that need to be fixed in transportation. So it goes to repair and replace our buses, which we drive about 1 million miles before we replace them. It goes to pedestrian safety improvements. It goes to maintain our roads and bridges. And a tiny amount of money goes to local congestion management, but that's typically only around the major seaports in the state, Oakland and LA and Long Beach and San Diego. Most of that goes to there because they have the greatest need. But our expansion projects, the big ones like 8065 and Highway 65, you can't use the gas tax for that. If we wanted to widen, a road or anything right here in Colfax, you could not use the gas tax to do that. Again, it's very much needed. So if we didn't have the gas tax, I know everybody hates it, especially now with the high price of gasoline, but if we didn't have it, we wouldn't be able to fix our roads, and we would need to find twice as much money as we're trying to find for transportation. Next slide. So we, over the past, I've been here for 4 years. If you kick it back even to 2016 when my predecessor was here, we've been trying to find a solution for how to fund transportation. And so the state gives us 2 ways to do it: a parcel tax and a sales tax. Most people in Placer County think a parcel tax is unfair because it makes essentially all the property owners pay for things. And especially when I mentioned, we have a lot of pass-through traffic, people that shop in the county, people that visit the county and have impacts on the county, but don't. But if we do a parcel tax, they wouldn't pay for it. It would be only the property owners. So we've been looking at a sales tax, our only other alternative, because 25% of the sales tax generated in Placer County as a whole comes from that pass-through traffic. So long time we've been looking at a sales tax measure. So back to 2016, we put a measure on the ballot for a county-wide sales tax, which included Colfax. Essentially, it failed miserably from essentially Newcastle up, and it made sense because those improvements were mostly from Newcastle down, and so people didn't want to vote for something that didn't benefit them. So we kind of switched modes and we said, okay, well, let's look at a district tax, so for only part of the county. And so since then we've been looking at the cities of Lincoln, Rockland, and Roseville, and the tax would be on them, or on their the tax generated there would generate the dollars, and it was spent there as well. We took a second look in 2020 at a countywide measure again. So we went out and polled again, and again, very, very, I shouldn't say zero, but it's very, very small support, essentially from Penryn, Newcastle. Well, I should say actually from this time from Loomis, all the way eastward, no support at all. So our board said, "No, we got to stick with our plan for the South measure." For the South District measure. So we've been working really hard through the pandemic and every issue imaginable to try to see if we can to show people there is a need and then to see if there's support. So, and the latest, when we just did this, we do a survey, multiple surveys here to see where we're at. And the latest one we did is April 10th to the 16th. And I'm going to share a couple slides with you. So the next slide. Essentially, we not only look at this, transportation only, but we have to kind of look at, well, what else is going on in the community? What are the other issues that are on people's minds? Because if transportation and traffic are not on people's minds, they're not going to vote for it. There's other things that are more important in their lives right now. And so you see here, the things at the top in this recent poll are inflation and gas prices. Traffic, which is now down at number 8 or number 9, used to be up there in the top. So early on when we did this poll, we went, this issue dropped significantly. It's not at the top of people's minds. Next slide. But when we asked them, well, here's our measure. It's essentially a $1.2 billion measure, half-cent sales tax for 30 years. It's to address congestion. Would you vote for it? And we got to 2/3, the 2/3 necessary. But then when you start to kind of take it apart, you simulate an election, it drops significantly, drops like a rock. And so what we would term this is we got to a soft 67. And we can't lose. We can't put this on the ballot if we're not there. And so our board, including the mayor, made the decision, let's just wait. So let's not put it on in 2022, let's put it on in 2024. Next slide. I don't think and this is kind of where we've been over time. So in 2017, we're at 75% in the South County, and then we dropped down, especially with the pandemic. And we are making a comeback, And so our hope is that by 2024, we will be back there. Traffic. The bad news is, but for waiting 2 years, and when people, we're at 117% of pre-pandemic traffic volume in the south part of the county, actually in most of the county. When people are going back to work, it's going to get really, really bad, especially down at the 80-65 interchange and then up to 65. Traffic is going to be very, very significant. So, the gentleman from Cal Fire, if he's trying to reposition a fire engine at 4:00 in the afternoon from Lincoln to Colfax, there's going to be a problem. It's going to be a bad problem. So, next slide. So, and I'm going to stop here before I talk about some of these things, which are your things. Why does this matter to Colfax? We have a history in Placer County of when there is a jurisdiction in need for funding, we find a way to fund it. And so, case in point, the picture on the bottom right, the roundabout project, and actually I think as it ended up, Wes, I think you didn't need the money, but we thought you needed some money. And so we asked the other jurisdictions, hey, Colfax has got this really important project. Can we horse trade? Can we, move some money around and help him because he had a cultural issue or something like that. And so we did, and we actually went in. Some state agencies here, but Caltrans is not here. We wouldn't beat up Caltrans a little bit, and we actually got the great attention of the District 3 director, Amarjeet Benapal, who now loves and talks about your roundabout project every time I see him. And every time he's talking in public, this is his, how he demonstrates that a little bit of money to a rural community can go a long way. And so that's kind of like, why does the sales tax matter to Colfax? Because do go into a sales tax measure in this county. Yes, we can do it just for the South District, but we have to come and ask you. We have to say, Colfax Town Council, a lot of your residents live, work, and shop down in South Placer. What do you think of this stuff in South Placer? Because the state says you have to plan the county's transportation as a whole. So we have to ask everybody, all the city councils. We don't have to have a unanimous vote, but we'd like to have a unanimous vote because we have to get to that 2/3 voting requirement. And so we would like to come up with a plan that if a sales tax measure is dedicated in for the south part of the county to address the biggest needs in the county, to improve the core of the county's economy, some dollars should come to Colfax, to be really blunt. And so we're not there yet because I don't think all of the cities and towns are in total agreement, but we're going to work very hard to make sure that Colfax, gets a little bit more dollars for its transportation needs, which for Colfax are great. Wes, I talk to Wes all the time, and he tells me all these. This was your CIP a couple years ago, but you have a big need. For a small town, there's a lot of roads that need to be repaired. There's further sidewalk projects, trail projects, and everything else. And we're going to help you, be creative to try to maximize funding. But with the sales tax measure, we need to come up with something for Colfax and for Loomis and for Auburn.
Mike, if you don't mind me saying something really quick. On this note, we had come up with some numbers during the 2020 round of trying to bring this forward. And I've taken a rather inflexible stance on this because, as Mike mentioned earlier in the presentation, 25% or more of our traffic in Placer County is pass-through traffic. And Colfax does take a brunt of that traffic, especially during the freeway shutdowns, to just mention some of our impacts that other jurisdictions don't necessarily have to deal with. But to top it off, we are not a heavy economic center here in Colfax, and our residents do primarily shop in South Placer County. So the tax dollars of our residents would be very directly impacted by this tax measure if it were to pass. And so in order for our council to support this measure, I would be very strongly encouraging that we kind of stand bold on this with our fellow jurisdictions who stand to have quite a large benefit, which again, we will benefit from as well, should it go through. But again, we need to make sure that we're also having our voice heard at the table on this. So I apologize for what might seem like my inflexibility, but I feel like this is one of those times where it's important to be stubborn.
No, we understand, and we're working very hard to come up with a solution that people will be satisfied with, and we're open to creative ways to do that, and to address the smaller jurisdictions' needs, and we're not talking a whole lot of money, so in the whole scheme of things. I'm not sure. I don't think I have any slides left, but keep going. If you could go to the next one. Oh, yeah, there was a couple slides I wanted to mention that we have left. Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
State right now that has $100 million. I'm struggling with, we have $100 million in surplus. Somebody just take 1% of that and mark it for the county.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you, and we're actually working other agencies like mine, SACOG, our sister agency, El Dorado County Transportation Commission. We're working very hard to try to convince the state to divert a portion of those dollars to transportation. But it kind of goes back to that beginning slide. We may get some dollars, but they have to be CAPDI compliant. So we're going to get probably dollars for transit and bike ped. We might get some money for road rehab, maybe, or safe streets or something like that, maybe. And certainly we're on top of it. So we're working really hard, literally every day. We're talking about the surplus. So with our law, we have a state lobbyist and who specializes in transportation, who actually son goes to Colfax High, actually. So we are desperately trying to get a piece of that surplus.
Gas prices almost doubled.
So as I mentioned, when we did the gap, all 49 other states increased their gas tax at those different levels. And they pegged that to inflation. And so California couldn't, for 17 years, could not figure out how to find a source of dollars for this backlog. And as you know, when you don't fix something, you know, the pile of projects just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. It's yeah, I said billions. It's actually, there's trillions of dollars of backlog in the state of California. In Placer County alone, there's a $1 billion backlog in road rehab. And so what happens when more gas tax dollars come in, we fix things quicker. So we've never done as much road rehab projects in the county as we have right now. We're rehabilitating roads all over the place. And we get about $20 million a year before this increase, and so we're getting more. But again, we can't use any of that for any roadway expansion. It's prohibited. So you're welcome. So last thing I was going to mention is the capital corridor. And well, why is this capital corridor important? Well, people need to get to the Bay Area, and they need to get to Silicon Valley for either work or for pleasure. But it's kind of difficult from Placer County because we got one train a day in each direction. If you go to the next slide, we're trying to increase that. So one of our key projects is and right now we can only increase it to Roseville. Because that's the agreement we have with Union Pacific Railroad. But we're very hopeful in the next couple of years, we're going to be able to increase it to 3 daily round trips. So three in the morning and 3 in the afternoon. And then eventually to 10 in the morning and 10 in the afternoon. And make it a real commute service. So that's important because you'll be able to go to Roseville and get on a train very easy and go somewhere. Roseville's expanding their park and ride and everything else to accommodate this. But then the next interesting thing is, if we go to the last slide, I think. Oh, no, sorry. Go back to that slide. So 2 things. One is, why can't we get more trips up to Auburn and Colfax? Well, the capacity of the rail lines is not such that we can do that. But we got UP to agree in concept to this. Excuse me. Our hope is that maybe we can get, after we complete this project, maybe we can get Capital Corridor expanded up to Auburn and Colfax for maybe we can't do 3 daily round trips. Maybe we can do 1 more daily round trip. Or actually to Colfax, it'll be 1. They're not getting any now because all they get is the Zephyr. So our hope is to expand that up the hill. The other thing that we just started working on, which I'm sorry I don't have the slide here for it, is we're actually looking at an expansion, the feasibility of providing rail service, regular rail service, not just the once a day thing with the Zephyr, but more frequent service all the way to Reno. And so expanding the Capital Corridor service all the way to Reno. So we want to do that. Believe me, we are keeping the Colfax station in mind. And it's a project it's going to take probably 15, 20 years to implement, but you got to start somewhere.
Well, and in context, this is also in competition, I believe, with the rail service request to Lincoln. So that's another priority that's on the table right now, and just to keep in mind.
Yeah. The last thing I wanted to mention is that we have done a tremendous amount of outreach, and we did, we came up here last time we were up here, we did an outreach virtually to ask people, well, are we spending money on the right things? And we actually did 20 of those meetings throughout the county, and we had hundreds of people participate in those, including some of you, to be honest, I thought things were going to change a little bit. The county's changing. We have a lot of people moving here from the Bay Area, but resoundingly, they all said, keep it how it is. And why aren't you doing it? Why aren't you building it? We have so 2/3 of our expenditure plan for our sales tax measure is on roads. The other third is on transit and bike ped. And so that amounts to about $200 million. So we're going to spend about $200 million on transit and bike ped. So it is a significant amount of money. And we went out and talked to the public and quite a few Colfax residents and other folks up the hill here. And they said, stay the course, don't change your plan. We think because we're a suburban or rural community, we should be 60% roads and 30% other modes. So with that, is there anything else you'd like to ask me related to transportation? I will look up if you would like, we talk to the Caltrans camera folks every week. I'd be happy to check into those cameras for you.
I'm not going to say no, Mike. Appreciate it.
Okay. It is related to the construction, though. I can already tell you that, but we'll figure it out and get an answer to you. So
We appreciate it.
And we have 2 public comments on this.
Perfect. Okay, so if council doesn't have anything specific they want to ask right now, we can go ahead and move over to online public comment, and then I'll call for public comment in the room.
So Christy Herman states the Capitol Quarter used to come to Colfax. And then on Zoom, Ravi Schlesinger asks a 2-part question. Is there a way to have different tax rates or a tax-free ID card for residents or residents under a certain income level? And what about commercial redevelopment? Will there be any investment in that?
So Mike, I don't know if you have immediate answers to those questions. If you do, you're more than welcome to provide them.
Unfortunately, the Capitol Quarter has never come to Colfax. I mean, there are those ideas for it to come here, but it's always been the Zephyr. It's the Capitol Corridor has always stopped at Auburn, and it might have come up here for a promotional thing or something like that. But really, the Zephyr is the only thing. But we would love to get the Capitol Corridor up here, regular train service, and so we're gently asking UP, and we're working with their staff, their regional government relations staff and some staff in Omaha to see if, maybe that's feasible in the future. So, and they didn't say no, so that's a good sign. So, and then the other question was an exemption for.
Yeah, tax ID cards or possibly different tax rates based on income level.
I have to be honest, I've never seen that, but
I would bring up the fact that in order for us to even consider breaking South Placer County out from the rest of Placer County for the potential tax measure, it required specific legislation in order to accommodate that. And it was quite a process of lobbying and going back and forth to and from the table. And there was one other jurisdiction, I want to say in Southern California, who was part of that effort because they were doing something similar. And there was extensive conversation about whether or not unincorporated portions of the county could be included in that. Ultimately, they were excluded. And so I think to do something like that, there would be a very strong sense on my part that it would require additional legislation.
It would. Yeah. I guess it's not a bad idea, but I've yet to see it in the self-help counties. There's actually 25 other counties in California that have a transportation sales tax measure. None of them have a provision for different low-income persons or any differentiation by persons. I would say that there is, however, a lot of programs set up to help people. So for example, we have a bus pass program. If you have a group, a social service group that needs bus passes, just ask us. We'll give them to you. You can give them to people. We have Placer Rides, which is we had this Placer Express thing, which is a big bus which took people to medical appointments, but it really costs too much. So we converted that system to a volunteer thing. So if you need to take your mom to a medical appointment and you can't afford to take her there, we actually have a program that will actually reimburse you the cost of that ride. So we do have programs in place to address that. Maybe we're not the best at advertising those things, but that plaster ride, you can hear a bunch about that in the near future, and it's available to Colfax. We're looking at things maybe like car share, where there's a dedicated car to some of the rural communities that people without means can use. So we are looking at things, but what right now, there's no way to have an exemption for sales tax that are poor right now. So.
Do you have any more online comment? Okay, seeing none, if we could start with in-person public comments on this item. Mike Garabedian, come on up.
Well, good evening. Mike Garabedian for Placer County Tomorrow and Friends of the North Fork. And I've been following Mike around now for a couple of weeks, and this guy's the toughest job in the world to convince people to increase their taxes. I have to hand it for him for his endurance and perseverance. This is 4 years ago, 2016, Measure M. It went down at about the same 3 billion issue. And once again, we're talking about what I would want to call log rolling, not necessarily maybe there's a better word that's just easier on the conscience than that term, because I'm not saying it's bad, but the different areas are getting what you need out of this. And that means you're also putting on the ballot the other billion, 1 or 2 billion, in the process. Now, no one's called anybody on that before. I guess they don't think about it, which is okay because you're doing your job here. So I don't know what the answer to that is, but maybe I'll talk about that a little more. So the big argument, those of you who remember the big opposition argument, was that adding lanes and capacity doesn't relieve congestion. Now, it may for a little while, but the studies from at that time, it was a 2015 summary of UC Davis, one of the transportation outfits there, talking about the history and how it doesn't work. And I'm going to check for there's an update and can pass that around like I did back in 2016, that particular one. So what's wrong with what's one of the main things wrong with this? Well, a column against the Measure M by Kevin Hanley. He identified 110,000 units at that point in the offing. And you think about that, if it's 2.7 per household, it's 300,000 more people. And there's enough development already and being approved all the time. It's just crazy what we're doing, just rubber stamping with the whole bureaucracy, all these people in planning set up to process things as fast as we can. There's another cost for taxpayers, but not applicable issue here. So the polls, I think there are about 8 different polls now concerned about the cost of that. That's just one sign of the persistence. So what should we do? Well, a good example of something was done. There's this, originally Eli Broad wanted to build a large area and that didn't go through. And then the county made a new plan, Placer Ranch Specific Plan and Sunset Area Plan. That was a county project paid for by taxpayers. I don't know if they're getting reimbursed. Anyway, so I guess I'll wrap up and come back and continue.
Go ahead and wrap up.
So the thing I was thinking about then is that there was an alternative plan. An architect in the county, a young architect, worked up something called the Citizen Smart Growth Plan, and she had several sessions where she presented to the public how she was looking at their outfit was looking at the natural resources, what were there, and starting with that instead of the blanket we've got, say, in the Placer County Conservation Plan. Blanket development. So anyway, this was at least an alternative proposed, and the county chose to ignore it. In fact, they hired a consultant to review it and went through it and criticized it line by line. But it may be that the public is going to have to try to figure out to work together to get somebody in here to talk about the modern, with which Mike is totally, and the people on the staff at PCTPA and Sparta are totally familiar with, that we hope somebody here would be looking at and and saying, okay, what are we going to do instead of this? How are we going to do this? So
Thank you.
anyway, thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you.
Always good to come here.
And do we have any additional public comment on this item? Absolutely.
My name is Larry Hilberg. I live in Colfax. Not my first rodeo here. I think this problem is bigger than Colfax. It's bigger than Placer County, and it's a state problem. And it goes back about 50 years. And I think counties and cities need to think outside the box. Back in the 70s, we passed Proposition 13 that froze property taxes to a 2% increase per year. And it was done not only for homeowners, but it was done for businesses and industrial buildings, et cetera, et cetera. And the state came to the rescue because it was a huge hit to counties and cities. They came to the rescue with sales tax dollars, to where now it's more valuable for a city to have sales tax dollars than it is to have new homes, which raise property taxes. What's happened over that 50 years is because every time a home changes hands, the new homeowner gets to pay much higher taxes than the person that was living there before. And after 50 years, now the homeowners are again carrying the brunt of those taxes. And those are the taxes that were used for transportation in the past. They were money that stayed in the county and didn't have to be fought for at the state. And I think the right solution, big problem, can't be done here, is to cause everyone to either stay at 2% or keep everyone's taxes consistent, especially industrial and commercial properties with current evaluations, because they're no longer carrying their share of the property tax burden. And I think that is, again, a big problem. It's a big solution. It's outside the box, but I believe that's the answer. My humble opinion only.
Thank you very much. Do we have any additional public comment on the item? All right. Well, seeing none, I will say thank you very much to our presenter and thank you very much for our commenters. We will go ahead and move on to item 6. This is a public hearing. We do not have public hearings this evening, so I apologize. We're going to move straight to item 7, public comment. Do we have any public comment tonight on any items that are not on tonight's agenda? Give Marguerite a moment to check online. You're more than welcome to come up and go ahead and. Yep.
Well, I Larry all the time, as they would say on the radio. I came to ask a favor. Like many of you, I stood on my doorstep about 10 months ago, trying to decide of our possessions what mattered and what was just stuff. And looking to the southwest, there was a huge plume of smoke coming right at us. I came back the next morning, and luckily, because of a wind change, my house and most of the homes in this area still stood. But there were over 50 people that lost their homes. The favor, about 4 or 5 years ago, the city, using a grant or perhaps city funds, cleared the brush down below our property, part of it, and up the hill from the ballpark. But when it came to about where the splash park area is, they stopped due to lack of funds. And that brush is still there. It's been there for years. There's also a bunch of dead wood stacked on the other land behind the water tank and just below our property that's been there quite some time. The city, has passed an ordinance that says we have to protect our neighbors. We've spent about $2,000 so far protecting our neighbors. We're going to spend another $2,000 over the next couple of days protecting our neighbors. one of whom isn't here tonight, sits on the council. Trinity, you're not so far away. We've spent a lot of money clearing brush on our property, and I am just asking the city, why don't you finish that job? You seem to have a lot of money, and just clear that brush immediately below our property, because if that fire last year had come over that hill, it was on us. And then in addition, there's a bigger pine fell down on city property above the water tank, just above our home, that basically would serve as a great fire ladder toward our house. So please, somebody take care of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. And Wes, I understand that there is some haziness to the lines between our property, PCWA, and all that. But let's see what we can do to have that resolved, because I agree strongly that if we're going to have an ordinance that's enforceable, we need to lead by example.
We are. We actually have an agreement going with CAL FIRE, the Washington Ridge crew at this point. We have some time before us with them to come and do some of this type of work in the city right away. Martin has led that endeavor to kind of get that going. It should be moving forward here in the near future.
By near future, do you have dates?
I do not.
Okay, can we get an update on that in swift order?
Absolutely.
When? Yeah.
We are leveraging this.
So the last effort that we made up that hillside was by the Washington Ridge crew at that time to get it done. And I think even Larry's got to recognize there was a significant amount of debris that was removed from below the ballpark and above on those projects. And we will continue that effort.
I appreciate that, Wes. And to play devil's advocate for a moment here, I think as a citizen and, an everyday resident of Colfax, I think the general expectation, again, is the lead by example. And regardless of how much we have done so far, the truth of the matter is the job's not done until the job's done. So could you provide a date we can have an update by?
We will have an update for council by the next council meeting on there and go from there. Martin will reach out, finalize the schedule and from which we'll get the work done. Now, keep in mind, some of this may change due to some of the strike teams and stuff get called out. And so it can change and adjust on this. So it may not happen until later in the fall when fire season's over, but we will work towards getting a timeline set.
2 weeks from now, can we have a schedule ready and then just be ready for me to criticize it?
Sounds like a plan. Yeah.
Does anybody else have any comments? Okay. All right. Do we have any other public comment?
There's nothing online.
All right. With that being said, we will go ahead and move to council and staff reports. Committee reports from council members. We'll go ahead and start with Councilmember Lemon.
Nothing to report tonight.
Okay. Councilmember Fatula.
Yeah, I got a whole bunch of things going on. So if you remember at the last council meeting, we talked about the chicken ordinance that's out there now. So I've got 2 sawmills that have committed to cut up logs to make lumber for doing the chicken coops. The estimates are there's like 100,000 down trees in the county. And if those trees aren't cut up and used in the next roughly 1.5 to 2 years, when they're laying on the ground, they're just spoiled. So they become kind of waste. I've got the men's group up at the church that we go to in Alta. There's about 8 guys that agreed that we'll pre-cut the lumber and make it into kits. I don't know how many we're going to make. That's a different question. But we'd like to try to make them available at no cost to like senior citizens, people on retirement, or low-income families. So I just asked Wes if he could just start a list at City Hall here. So people, as they think they might be interested in doing this, get your name on the list so we can get an idea of roughly how many we have to build. If it turns out there's too many than requests than what we can build, we'll put the names in a hat and just draw them in City Council here and say, okay, here's once you get it. But it'll be a kit. It won't include the hardware, it won't include the chicken wire, but it'll include the bulk of the thing, which is the wood. So Right, and I have a picture of kind of what it looks like to meet those specs that are in the thing. If anyone needs to see it afterwards, it's out there. I also put together kind of a conceptual brochure. I had Wes look at it the other day, and what I'm going to do is I'll print up a number of copies of that so we can put them around the town here. All that's at no cost to the city. So, right. Right?
And then do you have more?
No, that's it for that item.
Okay.
Right?
Then Councilmember Rathman.
Nothing to report.
All right. For my reports this evening, I actually, I'm bringing one item up there in good order. I will say that I felt like the job fair was a pretty good success, especially for being something that was very last minute. It was sort of a conceptual, let's just see how it goes kind of event, and we got a lot of interest from some really good groups. I know that the city had at least 15 people, I believe, collect applications, and I'm really hoping that we get those back so that we can get some seasonal help on and really take care of what needs to be taken care of. I'm hoping we can do it again in the future, and I just wanted to take a minute to thank the Chamber of Commerce for, doing the big lift on it. I know I kind of handled some of the organization, but Moriana and Tim were fantastic. Did a lot of great work in making it possible. So I know they're not here tonight, but I just wanted to say thank you to them. As far as the other committees, I don't have anything substantive tonight that I will, take more time with. I'll go ahead and pass it over to Wes.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I've mentioned it previously here as your representative on the Pioneer Board. I was asked to look to try to help find a site to site a biomass facility. And as we mentioned before, the Colfax landfill is one of those locations potential. A little bit of an update in that action right now. We're going to be meeting with a potential operator that could be on there next week. Wisewood is the company's name that would be operating the biomass facility, which is a 2 megawatt power supply. I'm also working with Cal Recycle right now to identify some potential funding that would help do what's called a clean closure, where we would take the garbage out of the landfill, take it to a class 3 landfill that's lined. So that way we could develop the project without having to do some kind of creative remediation for the site, like putting pylons through the garbage because it's not stable and that type of stuff. So kind of optimistic that we're going to get some traction on this potentially moving forward, but it's definitely going to be a long process. And as things continue to develop, I'll keep council and the public informed on it.
Thank you, Wes. I just want to make a couple comments on that. When it comes time for any decisions regarding that matter, I will be recusing myself because of the nature of my job. I would very directly probably end up working on that project from my day job perspective, and so I would have no place on council debating and sharing opinions. I will say though, from an objective standpoint, just industry knowledge, to set expectations, a project of this sort, even if you took out the closed landfill portion and scope, we're talking about a project that typically can take several years once you have a good plan in place.
Yeah. So
I just want to make sure that expectation is set for council, that a 2 megawatt biomass generator can take up to 5 years on some occasions, and given the likely reconductoring work that we would probably have to see done, just keep that in mind. Did you have anything else to report on tonight?
that's it, Madam Mayor. Thank you.
Okay. All right, we will go ahead and move to item 9, council business. We'll move 9A, proposed budget fiscal year 2022, 2023, and 2023, 2024.
So she makes her way up to the podium up there. I just really want to acknowledge all of Lori's efforts in this endeavor, and Shannon's as well too, and kind of bringing forward a budget, helping us guide through the workshop and stuff, and kind of outline everything. And I'm really appreciative that we have her on staff.
With that, we want to approve the budget. I wish it was that easy. Yeah, me too. Not really. It is your budget. No, we just so
We started this process a couple months ago, or even longer than that, with our staff inputs and putting projections together. We held a public workshop about a month ago with council. Went through a lot of details. I'm not going to dig into those details tonight. I'm going to keep it high level and then open it up. Happy to report we're looking at a balanced budget. That means that our expenditures are less than our revenues, with using some non-restricted funds to accomplish our budget. But that is called a balanced budget. I'm going to start just talking about the staffing levels. For the forecasted 2 years are consistent with our current approved staffing levels, so we're maintaining our staffing levels. We have built into the budget increases for COLA that's in accordance with our MOU with our union. And then we've also estimated in, and that was 3%, sorry. We also put in estimates at 2.5% and 5% for merit increases for staffing. And those increases go across union and non-union employees consistently. In addition to our staffing, we have the administrative functions that we contract out. Those functions include our attorney, our finance director, our planning services, our building inspector, and our engineering services. And those are all on an ad-need basis. And that's why we contract those out. The brunt of the budget is in the fund summary, and that's on starts on page, sorry, I wrote it down, 90 and 91 for the 2 years. That's where we have all the funds listed down the left and all the activity across. I'm going to hit just in general the different types of funds. The first one being our general fund, which are our unrestricted funds for use in the city. Within that, our revenues, we had so much talk about sales and use tax already, but that is our largest revenue source in the city. Historically, it's been about 50 to 60% of our total unrestricted revenues. The revenues have decreased in recent years, primarily, I guess, maybe to the pandemic. It's really, you can't really say. We're so small in some ways that, one business can kind of make a change on that also. But we think we're at the end of that decline, and so we are estimating a conservative 3% increase for both budget years based off of the current year. I think it's a pretty conservative estimate, and I hope at the mid-year I'm coming in and telling you that it's actually higher and that our businesses are doing even more. The next highest revenue source in the general fund is our property taxes. And again, we've put in a modest growth of 3%. We've had a lot of development, housing development, and then, like was mentioned, when houses sell and property values go up. So I think, again, it is also a modest increase that we're budgeting there. The next item that we're projecting a bigger change in for revenues is our transient occupancy taxes, and that's due to the new hotel in town. We've actually are estimating an 85% increase in this category, and I believe that that's a real conservative estimate also. I'm hoping to be reporting back to you that we're exceeding that when we get to our mid-year review. Most of the other general fund revenues were just holding steady with what they've been at. On the expenditure side in the general fund, our largest expenditures for our public safety services, specifically Placer County Sheriff and Fire Services. And we have a projection of a 3% increase for both fiscal years for those services. The next highest expenditure is for city staff, which I've already talked about a little bit on that. And then in the general fund, we also have a projection of transfers out to capital projects, funding our general fund capital reserves and our annual contribution to streets and roads expenses. So every year we do keep with our policy of keeping a 25% reserve for our operating fund, just 25% of our operating revenues. And then also that we add $50,000 a year to the capital fund for general funds. The special revenue funds are funds that we receive that can only be used on very specific purposes. The first one's mitigation fees. We took, again, a very conservative approach on revenues. We only forecasted in for the completion of the Sierra Oak project. There's other projects that are talked about, but we've determined that we're not going to put those things in until the projects become more concrete. We receive $100,000 a year for support for law enforcement. That comes from the COPS grant, that stands for Citizens Options for Public Safety. The past couple of years, we've received an adjustment. They call it an ELIAS adjustment for that, and we've actually received $50,000 to $60,000 additional that we've been able to apply to our sheriff costs. We just don't put that into the budget because it's not guaranteed like the grant itself. Transportation, streets, and roads. Everybody led up to all my discussion tonight with the presentations. We do receive our funding from PCTPA. And that's available for streets and roads operations and maintenance. Our expenses actually exceed what we receive, and that gets funded by the general fund and by gas tax revenues that we receive. The next major fund category is our capital projects, and there's a listing of all the projects on page 93 of the packet. The projected projects for the 2 budget years are forecast at $9.5 million. $8.4 million of that is funded by grants. That's 91% of the expenditures. The balance is funded by mitigation fees and operating funds. The largest projects are the wastewater treatment improvement project that we started that's putting solar in out of the wastewater treatment plant, adding some new equipment out there, and working on the inflow and infiltration system improvements. That project's ongoing and it's expected to complete at least the solar part within the next fiscal year, but we will probably not see the savings from that for about 2 years after that due to PG&E. Okay. The other large project is the CDBG construction grant project for road improvements, and we're still waiting for the final distribution of that funding, so hopefully that will come through soon. Then we move on to the Sewer Enterprise Fund, and we're continuing to follow the recommendations from the formal rate study that we did back in June of 2018. That includes a 2.45% increase each July 1st. We just implemented or are implementing coming forward the last of those 5 years. So we will be up for a new rate study in 2023. And the costs of that are built into the budget. The other items from that rate study were to maintain operating reserves in the sewer operations, also our debt service reserves, a short-lived asset reserve, and capital replacement reserve. So we put aside $100,000 a year for capital for the wastewater treatment operations. That's sort of my very quick overview. I think every year we say, you know, we have the same challenge. We have minimal resources to accomplish a lot of things. We're a small city. We're required to do everything as a large city for reporting and so forth. With that, I'll open it up for discussion and questions.
So, Lori, I want to apologize for not having a moment to get with you before the meeting to ask in follow-up to our discussion during the workshop. One of the things that I brought forward wanting council to do is establish or, if not establish a specific fund, but specify funds that will be restricted that we can use in the event of a catastrophic emergency, as we have seen going forward. That way we can build up a nest egg for the future. And I know that there were concerns on that matter. I did not see the specific breakout, and that was probably due to my own misreading of the documents, but I was hoping that you could touch on that. And then I know that we had talked about bringing that before the whole council. I know Marnie's not here this evening, but I believe she will be forgiving if we proceed with that conversation with the group we have here. I was hoping you could speak on that for a moment.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't build any changes into the proposal that's here tonight. Similar to what we did a couple years ago when CalPERS was making changes and the unfunded liability became a big issue, we set aside monies out of our already unrestricted fund balance. We set aside to handle that. So you can do that at any time. It's informal, if you will. It's not being put into place by a law or legislation. So,
Right.
you know, of course, any council could change it or anything going forward, but I think it's a good idea to set aside those funds and show that this is why we have reserve funds on the books, is to handle emergencies and things like that.
And
So that doesn't have to be done as part of tonight's, because you can do that at any time. We can set aside those funds and assign those funds.
Madam Mayor, it is identified in the staff report that staff is asking council to have that discussion tonight if they so choose. And we can get it incorporated in the budget if there's a decision to do so.
Perfect. And so that is my ask of council tonight, is for us to establish that. And I am very well aware of the fact that this is something that, although we're sort of putting a label on it, future councils will have the ability to relabel, move those funds around, so on and so forth. But as we discussed during the workshop, I feel like when we have the right group of people at the table to say this is how we think the job should get done, it does help set structure for future councils to look at it and say, okay, they had a reason for putting this money aside so that it could be used to mitigate emergencies. So I would ask council to be supportive of that and for us to entertain that discussion and what that would look like. Does anybody have any thoughts?
My thoughts are the same as from the workshop. I think that, correct me if I'm wrong, the general fund, pretty much covers that, and just, I don't want to be redundant, but just the fact that, you have a separate fund, where we don't give them those funds, are we limiting down the general fund because those funds are like, can't be touched because they're in the designated fund? That'd be my only concern. I understand your point. It's a good one, but I would just hate to restrict or cap the general fund in any way. So that'd be my only concern.
So my intent is for us to take a small, and I'm saying, what we can afford to take from the general fund, put it aside, put it into the piggy bank per se, that we can build upon it so that when we do look at it in the future, we're not coming in from a position of essentially coming paycheck to paycheck with our general fund. That way we have that pot aside in the case that it is needed. That is my ask of council. I do not want us to take more from the general fund than what's feasible or that will create more burden than benefit. But I would like to see us create a nest egg over time.
Lori, sorry.
Go ahead.
Good. Okay. What is the average amount of unrestricted funds roughly that we have in our budget every year? Roughly. Public knowledge. Sorry. Just have a random question like that.
Projected balance for unrestricted. So if you look at page 87 of it's the management memo, there's a little chart there for general fund unrestricted. And it shows a projected balance at the end of this fiscal year for our operating reserve, 500,000, for our capital, 300,000, 145,000 for pension, and we have almost 2.4 million in unrestricted general funds. So that's great. I'm really happy to report that. I mean, we've taken a lot of years to build up that balance. The other things to consider of why would the city carry that kind of money is when we go out to do projects that are cost reimbursable, we need capital reserves.
Yes.
So I just kind of in general for that. Yeah. So if you elect to set aside some funds and do a designation like we did for these other funds, I think that's an okay thing to do. And I wouldn't want to see us come up with, to Dave's point, to may have such a long list, that it kind of loses meaning. And so.
And I understand and totally agree with that.
I'm sorry, I wanted to mention one other thing. We did talk a few meetings, how many meetings back? It was in April when we put the grant application in for the home hardening.
Yes.
And if you remember, the match on that could get up to be some very substantial dollars. And that's a cost reimbursable grant. So I just don't want to give the idea that we're just sitting on funds here with no purpose or, not doing things that we should be doing.
So I just wanted to bring that up because we do have those funds available and earmarked, and we have a pretty substantial nest egg there to be able to either have for grant opportunities or probably, if we have a catastrophic issue or whatever, we do have some funds sitting there. So even if we don't move it over, at least we're still covered.
And this isn't something where I'm going to be hurt if we don't do it necessarily. I just think it would be good guidance into the future. I mean, like we talked about previously, we are a very small city, and we are generally quite a distance from most urban areas where there are job centers. And we do have a very limited set of people who are eligible to run for council and participate in these things on this level. And I think right now we have a very competent group. And so I would like us to take steps as a competent group to guide future groups, because we don't know who it's going to be. And so that's where I'm coming from, is we've hit 4 pretty major sort of catastrophic incidents in the last 4 years. And that's very unusual. And so I'm very much hoping that we are out of that trend, at least for the time being. I'd like to see us think to the future and just have, even if it's only $10,000 a year we're putting aside, 5 years from now, if we end up in another situation like this and we have a huge portion of people who are being evacuated from their homes, who are very low income, who can't afford to get a hotel room, then we have the ability to come in and say, okay, we've planned ahead, a little bit of cushion to be able to do things like this and mitigate the potentially very financially destructive consequences of things that a lot of us don't have to worry about, but our citizens do.
In that same example, and correct me if I'm wrong, could we use that catastrophic event as basis to just pull from the general fund if we needed to?
Yeah, we absolutely could, and we have.
We did.
And that's what we've done, and that's what's happened the last several years.
We did it for COVID.
Yeah, so I don't think there's any objection of that in a catastrophic event where we pool funds from whatever source we can now.
Right.
So that's not, I think we're all behind that. If we can help people in the community out, we're going to figure out a way to help people in the community out. The question is really, do we want to put it in a separate bucket, have another thing to track and deal with, or not? It's a real simple thing.
And alternatively, we don't necessarily have to have a separate bucket, but do we want to consider throwing an extra $10,000 at a bucket we already have? That's an alternative proposal I'm throwing out there. I just want us to take into account the amount of money that we've kind of put up front in the last several years and say, if this keeps happening, have we kind of planned ahead a little bit? And I know Lori is fantastic at being incredibly conservative, and we love you, and we don't know what we'd do without you. So I don't mean that to be a criticism of, sort of the assessment we already have. It's just my thoughts. I'd like to be incredibly conservative with this in mind.
I think I'd have to give it a little bit more thought before I committed to adding another line item on the budget or tying up more funds.
I'd be open to it if we could have a separate brush clearing fund.
Nice.
Well, it sounds like we're not going to have movement on this tonight, so we can bring it back up. It might be good for us to bring it back up with context after we get through this Cal OES grant. That might be a much more appropriate time to have the conversation.
I think that's a good idea.
So
that's a good idea.
Let's
push it off till after the Cal OES grant.
Let's revisit it once we have some determination on that. If staff's amicable to that.
And because that grant alone could be $1 million bill.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Your finance director is going to speak up anytime that the funds are going to be being looked at to be used and give input on that. So
we're definitely looking forward to that.
Yeah. You haven't seen that yet. I do, you pointed out, and I use that word conservative a lot. And I think it's just a good way for the city to be is to, I don't want to say underestimate your revenues and overestimate your expenses, because we're not doing that, but it is a very conservative approach that we've taken with this budget.
Well, I think it's important, especially when we look to the past and where we've been and how far we've come. We just want to make sure we're building positively in the right direction. And there's a lot of avenues to get there. And there isn't one specific way that qualifies as conservative or liberal accounting. So I appreciate council being willing to revisit this with me. On that note, I'm going to go ahead. If no one has anything specific they want to ask Lori about, I was going to take public comment, but you can go ahead and ask first.
So we had a question that came up on license fee recoveries. So we had the cannabis thing that we spent the money on, which was, if you go back to that workshop that we held, we spent, it was like $400,000 in the past on it, another $50,000 to do this last iteration on. There's nothing we can do for recovering the $500,000 roughly of the past, because that was prior councils.
Yeah.
But the current money that was spent over the last year or so was supposed to be all rolled into the license fee. So can you give us a summary of where those funds are at and how are we doing?
Yeah, so it was $48,000 and change, and that was going to be collected over 5 years. We collected $4,800 last year, and we should be collecting double that this year. For it to all be collected still within the 5 years. It's split over the number of active businesses, of which we only have one.
So $4,800 a year multiplied by 5 years.
We did $4,800 last because we thought we would have 2 businesses and we only had the one.
Right. So does that mean this year the rate goes up or next year the rate goes up?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes. And it will continue to go up.
Yeah, by year 5, it's all collected back.
Unless for whatever reason, there's other businesses to split it amongst.
Yeah, but whatever the number is, the bottom line is, so I can answer residents that have asked me the question, says, is their tax dollars funding the work that the city had to do for all this ordinance stuff, legal work and other stuff? And the answer is only for that 5 years as float, but at the end of year 5, it's balanced out as 0.
Correct. Yes.
Okay. Other than money that was spent with prior councils that we have no control over.
Correct.
Right. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
So if council has nothing specific, do we have any public comment? Online or in person?
Nothing online.
I'm surprised. Okay. Well, in that case, I will bring it back to the council for action as far as adopting the resolution.
Move to approve the proposed budget for 2022, 2023, and 23-24.
Can I get a second?
Second.
Right. Can I get a roll call, please?
Councilmember Berman?
Aye.
Councilmember Ackerman?
Aye.
Councilmember Fatula?
Aye.
And Mayor Burris?
Aye. All right. Thank you, Lori. Thank you.
Thanks, Lori.
We will move to item 9B, parking on narrow streets. If you don't mind, I would like to go ahead and kick it off. So this ordinance concept that we're bringing forward tonight, in concept only, was brought forward through a number of public complaints that I received, that staff received, regarding the access of emergency service vehicles and utility service vehicles, including sanitation. We have several very narrow streets in Colfax, and unfortunately, we have some people who have been parking on these streets in a way that's not very conscientious of the potential risks or inhibition of services that it creates. So from that, we had several discussions, me, staff, the sheriff's department, just trying to wrap our heads around what would be a good way to potentially solve this problem going forward. Part of the problem comes down to there is a gap between state law and our ordinances that does not make it illegal to park on these very, very narrow roads, even if you are directly in the roadway. And so because of that gap between state law and our ordinances, currently there's nothing that makes it illegal for people to be parking where they're parking. The solution that we kind of came up with was to put an ordinance in place that would give the city engineer the ability to designate roads for no parking areas. And it would give the flexibility for them to determine what restrictions are or are not appropriate depending on the specifics of that road. I'll turn it over to staff to go on further.
So I think Trinity covered it very well. I mean, the item is before council tonight for consideration. If there's enough support of council, staff will move forward with drafting the ordinance for consideration at a future meeting. We're happy to answer questions, and I don't know if you feel compelled to add to that a little bit, Mick, or not.
Just a little. If council does move forward and adopt an ordinance, the city engineer or whoever you designate will have to post signage and give people notice that wherever there are parking is illegal, so that then the ordinance can be enforced. It's not just a matter of adopting an ordinance and getting it on the books. You'll have to designate areas and sign them.
Yeah, so if I look at like some of the areas that I know we have problems with, if I look at Depot Alley that goes behind both North and South Main Street, there's parts on that street where one car can get by or one truck can get by, but if there's somebody parked there that's hanging out on the road, it shuts the road down. We also have the other thing that the businesses along there get most of their deliveries in the alley. I know like the shops that sell food, wine and beer and stuff like that, the trucks might take 5 or 10 minutes to unload. So we've got that complication there. When that truck is there, the alley is basically shut down until they're out. If they weren't able to do it there, the only other option would be to do it right on Main Street and block Main Street. So there's not a lot of choices that we have on that. So I'm not too worried about the emergency services because it doesn't affect the Main Street businesses because they're accessible from Main Street. And many of the businesses in the back are at the ends, not businesses, many of the residents are at the ends where they can at least get on the side street to get in where they're not too far away, right? And most of this stuff is during the daytime when it happens. I haven't seen, at least in the time that we've had our shop on Main Street, I haven't seen the alley blocked at night. So it's mostly I've seen problems is during the daytime when you got people driving in there, dropping stuff off and picking stuff up. So I don't know what a good answer to that is.
Yeah, well, this is not just the commercial area. This is a lot of the problems really exist in the residential area.
Yeah, I haven't
and
seen
that piece of it.
But yeah.
Yeah, on that note, I just also want to bring up another aspect to the proposal that this would cover is, as you guys know, with the winter storms and how the freeway gets shut down, we have an ongoing continuous issue with people parking in the most obscure places that make it incredibly difficult for law enforcement to do their job. And it doesn't help that we don't have any kind of ordinance on the books that empowers them to write tickets and have it be enforceable when people are frankly just throwing common sense to the wind. And so this would give the city manager, the city engineer the ability to essentially sit down with the sheriff's department and say, how can we make this work, not only for the regular basis, but on a seasonal basis, to restrict parking in areas that make sense?
Yeah, I'd be favor of going forward with doing something, but I think we got to specifically look at delivery type problems that occur and how we address that. And we have to look at also the narrowness of the street, because there are some places where it's wide enough, it doesn't matter. And there are some places where they're narrow enough that any minor problem shuts it down. So, but somebody's got to do that study. It'd be nice to have a standard before we go and say, well, we're just going to give it to the engineer and let him go figure out what he's going to do. We should almost have here's the guidelines for where we should be at. And then it'd be good to have a community meeting with all the people that are affected. So we do like an invite letter out, say, please come, because this is going to affect your street. So we get everybody's input.
So respectfully, I'm just going to play devil's advocate for a minute. The city engineer's job is to perform the studies that would provide the information for what restrictions are or are not appropriate. If we did want to follow up with resolutions and continuum to this, that would also be an option to provide further clarification on what our requirements are. I feel that this is one of those items where it makes a lot of sense to have flexibility in the ordinance so that we have the ability to do some trial and error and make sure that what we're implementing is functional. So that's why I'm presenting the concept in this fashion. That way, we're not taking something that could potentially be solved in a matter of months or over time as we figure out what works and what doesn't, and make it a very strict code that we're taking a lot of council time on when really maybe we're not necessarily the most appropriate person to be conducting a study or writing the specific restrictions. I mean, I'm open to us approving the city engineer's proposals and which roads they plan to put restrictions on. I'd be open to that. But I would like the city engineer to be the one to make the designations.
Yeah, I understand the comments, but I think some of the more generic guidelines is stuff that I'd be interested in focusing on. Like if the street is wider than a certain amount, right, it should almost be excluded from this, right? So that it's not an issue that we have there. If a street is narrower than a certain amount, something has to be done. So there's got to be some way to think about some generic rules. Otherwise, you're going to go back and say to either the residents or the businesses, well, it's kind of up to the city engineer whether or not you can park there or not.
Though we have examples of ordinances from other cities.
Yeah.
Those issues have been addressed. For example, some ordinances say no parking on one side of the street if it's 20 feet wide or less. And no parking on both sides of the street if it's 30 feet wide or less.
Yeah.
So,
and some of those guidelines I think would be good. I don't know if they're absolute guidelines, but I think it's good to start with. Here's a set of guidelines that the ordinance is focused on. And then we can tweak them as we need to going down the road. Right.
So I can see the wheels turning for both Sean and David. Sean, you want to go?
So I guess I could ask Mick or Sergeant Griffiths. So there's nothing in the vehicle code 22,500 through 22,526 that could be used in the city if somebody is blocking the roadway. Is that what I'm hearing?
Not in a parking ordinance sense like that.
Yeah, but if there's a vehicle stopped in the roadway or parked and just somebody's out of the vehicle and it's blocking emergency vehicle access or private residence access.
The issue came up, and there's been one issue that I recall came up, I believe it was over on Oak Street. The road is just simply small.
It's on my street, on Schultz, yeah.
Right?
I'm not the one with the issue, but.
Okay. And was parked on that edge of the roadway. There's no place else for them. There's nothing we can do. Cars can still get through. And that becomes the issue, right? We're concerned about bigger vehicles than a standard car getting through. The fire guys, they have bigger vehicles than ours, or Tahoes size. But I think that's what it comes to, waste management, trucks coming in, trying to get in there and do it. But the vehicle code in that situation doesn't work. Doesn't work for us. Yeah, if it's blocking the entire road, we'll have more to do, but if a regular car can get down, that's what it is.
Thank you.
And David, did you have any thoughts?
I agree with Joe in general. I mean, there's got to be a way to just have some sort of, I don't want to use the word generic parameters, but just some guidelines. And if there are roads that are really narrow and are significant, fire hazard, just about emergency vehicle hazard, then yeah, let's address it. I mean, my only concern really is, just would be, as with most things that we explore, would be like just the cost of the potential studies, if there are studies, and just, of course, cost of implementation. But no, it's a valid concern without doubt, but I'd hate to see a lot of money go towards it when there's other things.
Yeah.
So other cities have solved this problem. We're not the first one here that's ever had this problem.
No, and that's where I want to bring up the point that before I brought this to council and before it got on the agenda in that fashion, there was a lot of discussion and several meetings that happened to make sure that what was being brought to council was something that had some kind of feasibility to it. And I actually even sent over draft language for an ordinance for the purpose of having parameters in there and having it kind of work into what we need. But some really good feedback that actually came from the sheriff's department was that in order for it to be enforceable, there does need to be some specific, it needs to really be designated by the engineer, and that needs to actually hold some weight. And so in order to do that, when we got down to the language, we started realizing that we were having to get into a level of detail to make an ordinance work that was just frankly not appropriate. And so that's where I'm not sure who it wasn't me, who came up with the idea that maybe we should designate it to the city engineer's discretion to decide which ones are worthy or not worthy of having the signage and all that. That's where that came from.
That was me. Because there are several other cities that do exactly that. They delegate to the city engineer the right to make the call as to what's going to be restricted.
I'd be very open, though, to having those designations come before council to be approved by resolution before being implemented, if that seems like a reasonable middle ground to everybody, because I don't want this to become something that we're spending a significant amount of time and money on and using Mick for an endless amount of time to get an ordinance on the books that would have accomplished the same thing. That's really where I'm coming from on it. So if council would be open to entertaining an ordinance, I would love to have Mick put together something and bring it to us. I do not feel comfortable with the concept of putting together a subcommittee and taking a very significant amount of time on it, because it's actually an issue that it's affecting people pretty strongly right now. The complaints that I'm getting are consistent, and it's every single week, and it's the same group of neighbors on the same street that are very concerned. And we actually do have some public comment tonight.
And then some of those narrow, go ahead. I'm just gonna say, on some of those narrow streets, I've also heard the other side, like some residents are gonna be upset with signage, or get the paint, the sidewalk red or whatever. I mean, like, so there's that as well.
And the other thing to think about is we've also got to be careful about, because this is an old town. If somebody has a street or a property and there is no place to park and it falls below the minimum that's acceptable, the city engineer might say, we're going to put a sign up there and there's no parking. And now that person's got to, walk the block from
why I think it should
That's
go to the city
exactly
engineer.
what I wanted to point out, though. All of these streets that are narrow, that are going to have the passing problems with the vehicle parked on them, they're all the older homes, they're all the older neighborhoods, they're all older roads. And the vast majority of these homes in those areas do not have garages because they were built before those were standard on most homes. So we could end up creating huge issues. I know on my street, Schultz, he was referencing, we have problems all the time. I got people parking trailers blocking the road. People have their friends come over. There's no way I could get a fire engine up there. I go talk to the neighbors all the time about it and ask them to move their vehicles or whatever, because I can't get a fire engine up the road. And just as the road is normal, I can barely get a fire engine up there. Same thing with Forest Hill Avenue. So that's another street where there's parking on the road. It's hard to get around, but there's no other alternative for these people to park. Same thing with my neighbors. I mean, they can do what they can, but most of them have a very small one spot driveway, and
and maybe that's where it comes down to permanent parking. Again, by putting flexibility in the ordinance, I think it gives us the opportunity to come to the table with solutions instead of restrictions necessarily. And that's where I don't feel comfortable in bringing this forward, in the sense of saying flat out, okay, sorry, your road is less than 30 feet. Sucks to be you. I just don't think that's appropriate.
That's not even feasible in this town.
Exactly. So if council can kind of see where I'm coming from on, and it sounds like, Sean, you firsthand are very aware of the very real safety concerns that we're kind of having to balance here. I would love for us to bring something forward that gives us the ability to work on a solution and not necessarily set a solution in stone. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. I'll let council kind of finish comments and then we'll take some public comment.
I'm okay with looking into it more, but I'm very wary about restricting parking in a lot of these areas. No matter how much of a difficulty it is, worst case scenario, it takes an extra few minutes. You got a chain in the engine and you pull the freaking car out of the way. Whatever you got to do to get to where you need to go, if it's warranting that. But no, there's a lot of other stuff that goes along with this, and there's a lot of residents that can be severely affected with their parking ability or their ability to get around if we don't do this right. And so.
Sorry, I did want to add one thought on this is, as your city engineer, to make any signage control for intersections and all that type of stuff legal and binding, they have to bring it to council anyways. I mean, we can't just arbitrarily put up a stop sign or a yield sign. Council needs to take that action on the backside of it. So this would just be one more thing that, the city engineer would bring to the council as a recommendation, and then council would have the opportunity to weigh in on it if they chose to do so.
So what stops the city engineer from doing that today?
There's no ordinance to make it enforceable. I mean, if we're putting up signs that are not enforceable, all we're adding is sign blight.
This is literally just really closing a loophole.
Wait. So if we have a parking sign like on Main Street, are they not enforceable?
Sorry, I didn't hear the whole
statement. A parking sign on Main Street, like we do on Main Street in many places, are they not enforceable?
They are not enforceable at this time with our ordinance that we have in here. Right? There's.
And hold on, let me make sure this is clear.
Yeah.
I'm a deputy.
Come up.
Yeah.
I want to make sure this is clear. When this all started, I actually called our traffic sergeant because I'm a deputy. Yeah. My goal is not to go out and write tickets all day and do that. My goal is to take people in my car and take them to their home. So let me find out about that, and I'll have the answer for you by next city council meeting. Okay. I do believe the signs are enforceable, the red and white signs from my experience, handicaps for sure, absolutely enforceable. And I believe the no parking, the red and white is a designation for the signs that we can enforce. Part of the reason Trinity and I talked about this, I talked about the off-ramp areas, by the Chevron and how that gets impacted and how that impacts the businesses. There's no shoulder roadways where I can't cite people there when they're pulled over to the side.
But they're also on site. A lot of them.
Correct. But I would see that, to me, that's an area that causes concern for me because we've got to get people off of those areas because it makes it very tough for the engines that are coming from that side of town to come through town during those winter storms.
Now, mind you, when we're talking about a blanket across the board, we're red striping the road and we're putting up a no parking sign without any sort of special provisions where we've fine-tuned it to the situation, then yeah, we have certain things in place that can be enforced upon within the vehicle code and otherwise. But again, when we're coming to these more specific situations where we do have to be more delicate and we have to be more creative, our hands are kind of tied and it's not good any which way. And
that's not what I heard. And so what I heard is right now is if it's signed, it may be enforceable. And you're going to answer that question for us. So let me assume for the moment that it's enforceable. Right? The city engineer council with a recommendation of where to put signs. We don't need any special ordinance for them to do that. And council, either way, when we put up signs, stop signs, traffic lights, etc., has to approve it. So why do we need a special ordinance?
I guess my question, sorry, one second. My question is, if we know that there is a potential loophole that is hazy, and we know that it is a 2-sentence ordinance that could potentially fix that loophole without putting immediate restrictions, why would we oppose it?
I'm not opposed to it. It's just, it sounds like we don't need it.
Let me try to make sure we understand this, Joe, because I totally understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
But if it's my house, and I walk out on one of those streets that's been impacted like that, and now there's just this sign that the city decided to put up, and it's only my house, and I know there are 4 other streets just like it, I'm going to come back to the city. I'm going to say, wait a minute, why are you coming at my house and not holding all these other people accountable? And I think going down, if we're going to go down this road of doing this, then having the engineers, having that ordinance that backs all of us up, including the deputies who are out there writing that ticket, because now people are challenging the deputies. If they're going to go write that ticket and somebody comes out and a fight happens, it's an issue, and that's where we're having to be careful. It's 2022.
But I don't want to get to the horses out of the barn first. I want to back up a couple steps. So the first question is, if there's a sign that's posted, like no parking or limited parking or whatever it happens to be, or a stop sign, that would go even extreme, right? Are they enforceable or not? You can answer that question through your sergeant, okay? Okay, so we get that question off the books. If they're not enforceable, we absolutely have to do something, no question.
Well, I would absolutely believe that all of those signs are enforceable.
Okay, so let me assume for the moment, just for the sake of argument, those signs are enforceable. If they're enforceable, and if the city engineer, with or without an ordinance, still has to bring it to council for approval, then why can't the city engineer do it today? Why do I need another ordinance?
Well, we don't know the basis upon which those signs and striping and all that were put out there, but presumably they went through some process and had some legal basis. At this point, they don't have the right to restrict parking on just narrow streets. And I think that's the issue that we're wrestling with. And we're trying to give council the authority and the city the authority to restrict that parking and then follow a process to make sure that what you do is enforceable.
Okay, my suggestion, I need a little bit more education on this offline, right? So I can understand this better. And I think we've got some facts that we can gather. And maybe at next council meeting, we'll be ready to make some kind of decision there, but.
David, it looked like you had a comment.
I was just going to say, for any topic that has to do directly with a safety concern, it's a no-brainer. The question is, do we want to keep talking about it? My answer is yes. I think you've heard all of our concerns. So I don't think anyone's opposed to this, but yeah. So I'd say let's talk about it.
So, okay, what I'd like to do, if everybody's okay with it at this time, is just take some public comment, and then we'll come back around. We do have one written public comment. Marguerite, if you don't mind.
Yes, we have two comments. One is an email from Kim Ingersoll. She states, "Good evening, Colfax City Council members. I'm a resident of West Oak Street between Culver and Main Street. Our street is barely wide enough to drive one vehicle through, yet we have people who park on the road, which on more than one occasion has caused issues of myself as well as my neighbors and visitors. Choose our residents from being able to drive through the road to get. It has also prevented our garbage from being able to be picked up on scheduled day. Not only is it inaccessible to us most of the time, it would also be inaccessible to any local law enforcement or emergency vehicles. I fully support item 9B. And then Christy Parnham also stated that there are people that live on some of the alleys in town.
Okay. So on that note, we kind of need to give some direction, and I'm going to say that the direction I'd like us to take tonight is I would like, again, because we're not talking about something lengthy or with a lot of content, what I'd like to do is put this back on the next agenda. I'd like to have Kevin come back with any information that any council member feels that they need from him to help them understand where we would be going with this better. And I'd like Nick to be able to come with a draft ordinance. Again, we're talking about something very short. That way we can nitpick it and we have something to adjust. Does anybody have any opposition to any of that direction to staff?
I'd like to get a walkthrough of several example places of where these problems are, just so I can physically see them.
Okay. Do you have any opposition to the rest of my staff direction? Okay. Any other comments on it?
Grass Valley, Nevada City, they have narrow streets. How do they, I'm sure it's where you got the data.
Yep.
I've got them from lots of places.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I agree, it is a real problem. It's just, I'm worried about the case where the street is narrow, the homes are old, there's no parking spaces, and somebody comes back and said, what's this? It ends up being a safety concern, so now you have no place to park. And we've got a lot of older adults in the city. If they had no ability to park next to their property, I don't know what they would do. You know?
And I completely agree.
And there's a lot of places in the city where if we just made it, you can only park on one side of the street, it would dramatically improve the situation, right? Or we make a street one way, like the one street that comes down off of Forest Hill, where we've seen about 4 near misses now with kids almost getting hit because it's too narrow for 2 cars to go up and down at the same time. And they come right off of there at 20, 30 miles an hour. It's like,
I agree.
yeah.
And this is a fantastic opportunity for the city engineer to make those determinations.
Yeah.
Just one last comment in general, and I do feel for obviously people who live on narrow streets. For me, just for future reference, if we carry on with this discussion, if it comes down to like a safety concern, you know, like kind of an emergency vehicle, like get through versus does someone have to walk a long way? I feel for that person that might have to walk like from a designated parking spot, but I'll just tell you, like, I'm going to be in favor of the emergency vehicle being able to clear that street.
Well, and I'm going to also kind of come in the middle there. If there's a situation where you really don't have anywhere else to park and that's where you end up parking and an emergency vehicle does need to come through and there is damage to your vehicle in order to accommodate that emergency vehicle being able to do their job.
Yeah.
The city and the emergency responders should not have any question of liability on the matter because they have to be able to get through to save lives.
Yeah.
So. Okay, well, it sounds like we have some good staff direction. And did we have any more public comment on the item before we move forward? I want to make sure I didn't exclude anybody. No? Okay. All right. Well, with that being said, I feel like staff has direction. You don't need a formal vote of any kind. So we'll move to item 10, go to the order. Sean?
Nothing for tonight.
Okay. Joe?
Nope.
All right. David?
Not for now.
Okay, the only thing I had is there is the California League of Cities, correct? There is a conference that's going to be coming up in what, is it Newport Beach?
Yeah, somewhere far away.
Okay.
Carlsbad, I think is what it is.
Long story short, I just wanted to see if any of our council members are interested in that, and if not, we can go ahead and move on. But if there are any council members who feel that they would like to participate in that and represent Colfax, then I wanted to bring that forward to see if we can agendize it so it's done in a timely fashion.
How many can go and what's the date again? And I saw the email.
I think it's September 7th to 9th. What is the cost for attendance? I know I'm totally putting you guys on the spot.
I don't recall. We can reflect on that, but it's part of what the discussion tonight is if council does wish to participate in that conference, the California League, you have to authorize delegates to go in there as voting members. There's some decisions that they make. And before we went through the whole exercise of bringing that item forward for delegates, we just wanted a general consensus of councils whether or not you want to participate in this conference that's way down in Carlsbad.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's closer and it's easier to kind of accommodate.
Yeah.
But I just want to, I didn't think we were going to do that, but I just wanted to gauge from council if you want to incur that expenditure for the city to do that.
I just didn't
Are
want
there
to
any,
feel.
are there any serious legislations that affect Colfax that are coming up?
Not that I'm aware of, but we will do a quick touch on that to make sure. And if there's not, then if council is okay with it, we'll consider the item a moot point at this.
Yeah.
If you guys find anything that you think is significant to Colfax, or if, again, we're talking about something that is incredibly low cost, then maybe what we can do is put it on the agenda. And if it does not end up that way, then a simple email to council letting us know that it just doesn't seem like a great idea. I think that would be fine. So that, I guess, as long as everyone's trust staff's recommendation, that sounds like a good plan to me.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. That's all I had for go to the order. And did staff have any closing thoughts?
No, I think we're good.
All right. Fantastic. We are adjourned.
I made you a copy of the latest